Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome in across the continent and beyond for another very exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. So many of you are new to us today, and so if you are new to us, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world through like 40 live, free, monthly interactive broadcasts with the coolest scientists and explorers on planet Earth. So I hope you take the chance, check out our YouTube channel. There's like 4,000 past broadcasts there. There's a lot of me. There's too much me. In fact, I'm on the internet way too much. But I'm really excited that of all days, the 1,300 of you from I think 25 states and 6 provinces are joining us as we continue our epic series in conjunction with the amazing folks at the World Wildlife Fund. We have done 10 broadcasts with them this year on everything from AI and mangroves to beavers as nature superheroes. It's been a wild ride. You can check them all out there or on that YouTube channel. Now, before I introduce today's topic and our speaker du jour, I want to note we do have a Kahoot today. So between our talk and our Q&A, we're going to have a little 4-question quiz to test some understanding, have some fun for bragging rights for the grand bee knowledge champion, and you can pull up that game pin and play along with that in just a second. Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce Clay Bolt, the pollinator lead for the World Wildlife Fund, and today he is going to share a little bit of his amazing story personally and that of shiny, stripey, super bees, the pollinators that we all absolutely love. Hopefully you all love them. If you don't love them, by the end of today's broadcast, I bet you change your mind. So without further ado, I'm going to zip my lip, turn you over to Clay. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to the broadcast, man.
Thanks so much, Jesse. And hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today to talk to you guys about bees.
It's such a great topic. And as you bring up your presentation, because I know you've got a lot to share with us, I want to note you crushed the astronauts. Like, we've had people who've gone to space. We've had several astronaut programs this year, and bees just got a way bigger audience. So it speaks to the excitement behind the topic that you've spent your life working on and understanding. And it's very, very cool stuff.
Well, what can I say? The bees speak for themselves. They're very cool, and I'm excited about the enthusiasm here today.
I can't wait. So feel free, take us away. Let's bring that up. And I'll make sure all our audience has that Kahoot link in the chat. And as you're pulling it up too, I will say we've got some extra resources to keep our learning going after this broadcast is done. So stay tuned for that in a big email when we're done. But Clay, you're in. It looks great. We've got a beautiful bee friend here. So let's do this thing.
Okay, great. Well, thanks again, Jesse, and thanks everyone, like I said, for being here today. It's such a privilege to be able to share some cool facts about bees and other pollinators because, let's face it, they're really amazing animals that don't get enough credit. When I was about your age, I was fascinated with insects, and I've always loved insects and art. And those two things have really led me to this point in my career where I'm really looking at amazing things in nature and I'm presenting it to the world and saying, look, isn't this the most amazing thing you've ever seen? And I do that through a various different ways where the World Wildlife Fund, including as a photographer. I do a lot of work as a natural history conservation photographer. And I also do a lot of work around communications like I'm doing with you guys today. And it's really my passion to share my love of nature with other people. In my work as a photographer, I get to travel to some really amazing places like the American tropics. This is a helmeted iguana that I photographed in Panama. It's a really cool species of iguana that's stuck on a tree so that it's pretending like, hoping that maybe I don't see it. And these iguanas are so cool. They move very slowly, and they even grow moss on their bodies because they're moving slowly through the rainforest canopy. And I do sometimes photograph mammals. These are capuchin monkeys that I photographed in Costa Rica. But my passion has always been the little species that most people tend to overlook, like damselflies, dragonflies, grasshoppers, and of course bees. And one of the things that I like to remind people of when I'm presenting is that we are some of the largest creatures on Earth. And really, over 99% of life on our planet is smaller than your little finger. So when you think about, if you try to name or think about all the animals you know, a lot of those animals are going to be large animals like you and I. So things like blue whales and polar bears and tigers, but most life is very, very small. And what that means is those small things like insects, like spiders, like creatures that live in the ocean, like plankton, are really, really important to ensuring that the rest of life on our planet can survive. And I always say that if bumblebees were the size of tigers, then people would be paying a lot more attention to those small things. But because they are so small, sometimes we have a difficult time seeing them. Now, today my subject is really focused on pollinators. And of course, there are a lot of different types of pollinators in the world. We know that that some birds are pollinators. We know that butterflies are pollinators. Even ants can be pollinators. You can see this one on the top here has some pollen on her body. Flies, believe it or not, can be really good pollinators. There are mammals that pollinate. There are lizards that pollinate. There are frogs that pollinate. It is a whole range of different species. For those of you in the desert Southwest, bats are really important pollinators. So in places like Arizona, we have a lot of bats that are really important pollinators. But truly, the superheroes of the pollination world are bees. And bees are specially adapted to collecting pollen. And they have some special adaptations that allow them to do that. So you'll notice on this picture of this bee, she is covered in lots of really small hairs across her entire body. And those are called scopal hairs. And if you look at those under a microscope, you can see that those hairs are feathered and branched, almost like a plant. And these special hairs are specially evolved to allow bees to collect pollen. Believe it or not, bees are actually vegetarian wasps. So wasps will collect their food in the form of things like paralyzed katydids or spiders or caterpillars, lots of different things like that. Whereas bees, those vegetarian wasps, feed their young pollen and nectar. And these specialized hairs on a bee's body cause pollen to leap onto the body of that bee, because bees carry a static charge. So when a bee lands on a flower, the pollen's in many cases leaping onto the body of the bee. Now, it's sometimes difficult to tell what a bee actually is. If you look at if you're in your environment and you're seeing something that looks like a bee, it might be a bee or it might be a species that's mimicking a bee. So for example, here on the top left, this is a species of fly that mimics a bumblebee. And it does that because if it looks like a bee, there's a good chance that predators won't try to eat it. Of course, this fly has no defense. It doesn't have a stinger. It can't, fly in the same way that a bee can in terms of being so fast, but it likes to visit flowers. It likes to drink nectar. And so by looking like a bee, it has a way of defending itself. And there are a lot of other species of fly that do that. This is a pair of insects from the American tropics in South America. So this is a species of fly that looks like an orchid bee. And this is one of my favorite types of bees. Aren't these just extraordinary looking insects? There are also types of flies that mimic bees because they like to eat bees. So this is a type of robber fly that I photographed in South Carolina that looks just like a common eastern bumblebee. It flies like a bumblebee, it sounds like a bumblebee, and because it looks so much like a bumblebee, it can also sometimes snack on bumblebees. I first got interested in bumblebees several years ago. I was concerned because I read this headline: "The price we'll pay if we don't figure out what's killing the honeybee." And many of you have probably heard that honeybees are in trouble in some ways. And so I wanted to do something as a photographer to help people care more about honeybees. So I decided to go out in my garden and photograph honeybees to start learning more about them. And I should tell you that one of the first things that I learned when I started learning about honeybees is that honeybees are actually not native to North America. They were actually introduced in the 1600s in the same way that we brought over cows and chickens from Europe. Well, honeybees were brought over in the same way. And while honeybees are an amazing animal, they do a lot of really important stuff. They help us with our food. They help us to have delicious honey to eat. They are a little bit in a different situation than other bee species. And what I learned on that first day when I went out to photograph bees in my garden is that there are a lot of other kinds of bees. And so my very first day going out to try to photograph honeybees, I didn't photograph honeybees, but I photographed these two small bees that are called sweat bees. And at the time, I didn't know anything about sweat bees. I just knew that what I had photographed were two really beautiful small species of bee. And these are both really small. They're smaller than a grain of rice, so really teeny tiny. And I was fascinated. And as I began to do my research, I found that there are 20,000 species of bee in the world, and scientists are discovering new species all the time. Here in North America, we have around 4,000 species of bee. And in every state in the country, we're finding new bees all the time. In fact, in Arizona, Arizona has the highest number of bees of anywhere in the world, in the deserts of Arizona. because bees originally evolved from warm, temperate areas like the deserts of the southwestern part of the United States. And so because of that, we have a lot of species of bee there. And our bees in North America and beyond come in various different shapes, colors, and sizes. And as a photographer, I'm always just so excited because it's like looking into a candy store. All of these amazing bees, they look different. They do different things in the environment. They have different ways of living, different places they nest. They visit different types of flowers. It's really extraordinary. I mentioned earlier that orchid bees are some of my favorite. This is one that I photographed in Colombia in South America. And orchid bees are really fascinating species in that the males have these really large back legs, and they use those to collect scents, fragrances from different types of plants. And the more of this, let's say, floral cologne that they can put on, the better they smell to the female bees. And so they're flying around trying to collect as many of those scents as possible to show how strong and tough they are. One of the things that I find really interesting about bees is that they are able to collect pollen in different ways. And that's one of the ways you can tell the different types of bees you're looking at. So for example, bumblebees, which are my favorite types of bees to work with, have a thing on their back leg called a pollen basket. So you may have seen a bee flying around with a big ball of orange or pink pollen and nectar on their back legs in these little balls. Well, that's held in something called the pollen basket, which is this very smooth area on the back of the bee's leg, and these curved hairs that wrap around the pollen and hold it to the bee's body. And this is one of the cues, for example, that bumblebees are close relatives of honeybees. So bees kind of are grouped together in part by the way that they collect pollen. Other species, like this longhorn bee that I photographed in late summer in Montana, collects pollen in a different way. So you can see that she has sunflower pollen all over her body. Those scopal hairs go all around the entire body, and she is kind of a messy pollinator. And once she kind of crawls through the flower and all that pollen's on her body, she will brush it together to try to compact it a little bit before she moves to the next flower. There are also bees called mason bees and leafcutter bees. This is a leafcutter bee, and it's given the name because they have these really cool scissor-like mandibles that they use to chomp through leaves, and they use those leaves to form a cradle for their young in the nest. But these bees collect pollen underneath their abdomen. So right here you can see those scopal hairs that are underneath the abdomen, whereas it doesn't have very many hairs on its leg like a bumblebee does. And there's a reason for that. So maybe at your school or at your home, you've put out nest boxes for bees, bee hotels, they're sometimes called. And this is a little mason bee that I photographed. And you can see that she has filled in one of these tubes with chewed up bits of vegetation and pollen. Well, if she had pollen collected on the side of her legs like a bumblebee or a honeybee, when she crawled into the tube, it could get scraped off. So instead, by keeping the pollen beneath her body, she's able to keep it safe so that she can bring that into the nest. And she'll take that pollen, make it into a ball. Some bees make a little cube, but most make a little ball. She'll lay an egg on that and then seal that off. And so her egg and the pollen ball will be in its own little room, and it will grow in that chamber until the time for it comes for it to emerge. And this is a photograph of a leafcutter bee taking her leaf into the nest that she will use to sort of build that cell for her young. Bees also do really interesting things. This is another species of mason bee that I photographed last year in Montana. This is a type of mason bee that was reported it nests in animal poop. So it's kind of an interesting story. Probably historically, this bee nested in bison dung, but now you can find it occasionally nesting in horse or cow poop. But you know, in the very dry parts of the places where this bee lives, having a nice little poop hotel is a great place to raise a family, maybe. But interestingly enough, for those of you who are interested in science and who are interested in exploring and finding new things, I became the first person to photograph this just last year because it had been described by a scientist, but it had never been photographed. And it had only been described, this behavior, just a very few years ago. So there are always new things to discover. There are some strange ways that bees live in the world. Now, some other species of bee they collect pollen by swallowing it. This is a very small yellow-faced bee. It's really teeny tiny, and she doesn't have very many hairs on her body, and so she will swallow the pollen, take it back, and then regurgitate it for the young, similar in the way that a mother bird would feed her young. The other thing that I think is really interesting to mention is when we think about bees, there are certain kinds of ideas that we have. For example, most people think that all bees live in big hives like a honeybee, that all bees are quick to sting. And the fact is that most bees are actually solitary. So you could almost say that these bees are like hardworking single moms who are out in the landscape providing for their young. They don't live in big hives. And many times you can find bees, these solitary bees, which means bees that are, basically living by themselves. They're doing the work by themselves. They don't have a big family that they're working in. And so they'll sleep on flowers at night. And so if you go out in the afternoon, if you find a patch of wildflowers in the summer, you can go out and maybe see a bee sleeping on the vegetation. And so they use their mouth or their mandibles to clamp onto the vegetation, and that's how they sleep. I shouldn't complain about my mattress anymore. And some of these bees will visit many kinds of flowers, and then some bees, like this globe mallow bee, only visit one kind of flower. And so bees have lots of different strategies for surviving in the world. I don't know if you've heard about this, but there are actually bees called squash bees. Squash bees originally originated in Mexico and in Mesoamerica, in the same place that squash also originated. And as native people, indigenous people moved squash up north towards North America, what is now United States, those bees followed those plants northward. And what's super interesting is that that squash plants have large pollen granules, and a lot of bees don't like those. But these squash bees have specialized scopal hairs that allow them to carry that large sticky pollen. And they get up in the morning before honeybees have even gotten out of bed. So they are really in tune with pollinating these amazing food plants. There are also bees that have adapted to eating plants that are very toxic. So there's a species of plant in the American West called the death camas lily. And death camas, by the name, is very deadly to deer and cattle and other species that might nibble on it. But this little bee has adapted so that it can feed its young the poisonous pollen and nectar from the death camas lily. It's super amazing. In other parts of the world, there are really bizarre bees. So this is a rediviva bee from South Africa, and it's developed these long front legs so that it can reach its front legs down into flowers to collect what are called floral oils. There are bees that fly at night. This is another species from southern Arizona that visits a couple of different flowers, and I photographed this bee at around 5 a.m. in the morning when the sun had not yet come up. There are bees that can land on water. This is a species that likes to sip water from the surface of a stream or a pond, and she takes that water back to the hard desert soil, releases that water, and it allows her to dig her nest in hard, rocky soil. There are also super tiny bees. This is a little species of cuckoo bee that I photographed next to a dime. So you know how small a dime is, and then this is much smaller than that. This is a small bee from my backyard here in Livingston, Montana. I live very close to Yellowstone National Park, and we are known for big bees, big animals, but we also have some really small insects here as well. So just to give you a sense of how small that nest is, here's the nest entrance, here's my camera lens, and here's another dime, just to give you a sense of how small this little mason bee is. But the smallest bee in the world is found in the southern parts of the United States, really from maybe like New Mexico over to California. It's called a Euphorb mini fairy bee, and it is super, super tiny. So just to give you a sense of how small that bee is next to that other bee that I showed you, this Holcopocites, this bee is even tinier. However, there are also really big bees. So in 2019, I was the first person in the world to photograph and help rediscover the world's largest bee called Wallace's giant bee. I photographed it in Indonesia, and you can see how big this bee is next to a honeybee, and it's got these large mandibles that it uses not to bite. It's a very gentle bee, but it uses it to collect plant resin from other trees, sticky resin, because it lives inside of termite mounds. And so, of course, if a bee is digging into a termite mound, the termites don't want the bee in there, so they would try to attack. by putting the sticky trap inside of the bee's nest, the termites can't get to it. However, if you compare that bee to the smallest bee, here's a little silhouette illustration of the smallest bee, you can see that, wow, there's a huge difference between the smallest bee and the largest bee. And by chance, I'm the only person in the world that I know of who's photographed both the smallest and the largest bee in the world. But I wanted to end this little talk with my favorite bees. I mentioned that I love bumblebees, and I think bumblebees are so great because they are really important pollinators. They are gentle bees. They come in lots of different colors, shapes, and sizes. Of course, they're fuzzy. We have around 250 species in the world, so they're not a extremely diverse group of bees. And we have around 45 in the US, and Montana, where I live, actually has more species of bumblebee than any other state. And one of the reasons that bumblebees are such super pollinators is because they, of course, have these pollen baskets, and they also are very furry, as you can see. They have a lot of hairs on their body, but they also can do a few things that sort of point back to their origin and where they began. So bumblebees are some of the only insects that can actually raise their own body temperature. So most insects are what's called ectothermic, which means that they have to get their heat from the sun or from the earth. They're not able to, like you and I, we have a ability as our bodies can warm up. And of course, if we get too cold, we can shiver. Bumblebees can do a similar thing to bring up their body temperature. They can unhinge their wings internally from their flight muscles. And when they do that, it allows them to vibrate those flight muscles and make a sound, and that causes their body to warm up. But the other thing they use that for is when they land on a flower, they do a thing called buzz pollination or sonication. And what they're doing is unhinging their wings again from their flight muscles, vibrating their body at a note of middle C. If any of you play piano or instruments, you might know what a middle C is. It's a specific tone that allows pollen to fall from the flowers of tomatoes and blueberries. And so they're really, really important because honeybees can't do that. There's only a very few bees that can do that. And so bumblebees are super important. Bumblebees evolved around 28 million years ago in the ancient Himalayas. So in Asia, around Nepal, during a period of global cooling, during a period of an ice age when temperatures were really dropping around the world. And so these bees, the proto bumblebees, we'll call them, the early bumblebees, were more like wasps. But as temperatures began to cool down, these bumblebees evolved those thick coats, those big fat bodies that they have. They evolved that ability to thermoregulate or buzz pollinate their own bodies, if you will, to get warmer. And so they've carried that throughout the future. And so that's one of the reasons that bumblebees like cool weather. They like mountains. You can still find a lot of bumblebees at really high elevations in the world. And in fact, I'm working on 2 books right now, both looking at bumblebees of all of the Americas. So later this summer, for example, I'll be in the Andes, in the Amazon, and also in parts of South America looking for bumblebees for my projects. And today, in places like Denali in Alaska, you can find bumblebees high in the tundra, the Arctic tundra. Of course, bumblebees can be found on our coastlines in places like Oregon and Washington. And they're found in our cities, places like San Francisco, places like where I live. You can find bumblebees in New York City and Washington, D.C. They're pretty adaptable if you give them a chance. And I think that one of the things that I love about bumblebees is that, they are great bees to study when you're interested in learning more about bee behavior. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about the bumblebee's life cycle is even though they are one of those species that are social, they have a different way of going about it than, say, a honeybee. A honeybee has a queen bee that only lays eggs. Then she has her daughters who are the workers. She has bees that, the males that are the drones that come out. But they have very specialized ways of living in the world. Whereas a bumblebee colony starts out in late summer. So, for example, this year in late summer, new queen bumblebees will be born. They will collect pollen and nectar to build up those body fats, just like a bear getting ready to hibernate. They will mate and then find themselves a hole in the ground where they will overwinter, and their bodies will completely freeze during the winter months. But it doesn't kill them like it would with other animals because they have a type of antifreeze in their blood that keeps ice crystals from forming in their blood. So these queens are completely motionless during the winter months, but she'll make herself a little wax cup that she fills with nectar. And so that when spring rolls around, she'll have a little bit of food to get her going that will allow her to dig out of this little hole. And from there, she will go out and begin collecting nectar and pollen again. She's already mated. She's ready to lay eggs. She will find herself a nest in a rodent burrow or an abandoned, some sort of mouse nest, for example, or a bunch of grass, depending on the species. And she will start laying her eggs, and she will sit on those eggs like a mother bird until they warm up and are hatched. And then from that point, her daughters will become the worker, and then she will stay in the nest. So there's a shared way of working with bumblebees. It's a little bit different than honeybees. This is a picture of a bumblebee nest. So they make this really interesting wax that they shred up with their mandibles. So this is the queen here, and these are some of her daughters who are the workers, and they'll be leaving all the time, and she'll stay in that nest. Unfortunately, bumblebees need our help. So each one of you probably have bumblebees in your neighborhood, maybe in your backyard or at your apartment complex, and they need help because bumblebees are being harmed for a few different reasons. Pesticides, they need more flowers, and they need more places to raise their young. And so there's a few things that we can do to help bumblebees. One of the species of bee that I'm really fascinated with is the rusty-patched bumblebee. And if you live in maybe Wisconsin or Minnesota, you may have heard of the rusty-patched bumblebee. Well, I learned about this bee a bunch of years ago, and I helped to put it on the endangered species list through some work that I did. I made a film. I spoke in front of Congress during a congressional briefing to really try to get people to care about this bee. But what's so great is that people just like you and your families are the ones that are really helping this bee by planting flowers in their yard and doing lots of other things that are good for bees. And there are other bees that need our help. This is the Southern Plains bumblebee, a bee that's found in the Great Plains near where I live that needs help. There's the American bumblebee, there's the Western bumblebee. Many of these species that are typically quite common really are in need of our help. So as I end this talk, I just want to turn to just a very few things that you can do to help bees. First thing is, allowing some flowers to grow in your lawn is a good thing. So sometimes in the spring, you might have some plants that some people consider to be weeds coming up, but those flowers can actually give some early spring food to bees, like this carpenter bee. This was photographed in Maryland, and if you don't want to have dandelions in your lawn, you can ask your parents to plant some wildflower seeds, maybe in a pot or in a little garden bed, and that will also provide those bees with food that they need. You can also plant wildflower patches. And the one thing that is really important to remember when you're planting flowers for bees is, it's always best to try to plant flowers that are native to where you live. So the plants that are found naturally in the place where you live, and there are different native wildflowers all over the country. You want to plant a group of flowers that bloom from early spring all the way into the end of summer, almost into fall, because like you and me, bees need to eat all the time, and they also need a varied diet. So you want to plant flowers that don't just bloom in the middle of summer, but also all throughout the growing season. And the last thing you can do is, one of the last things you can do is, there are some really great websites for citizen scientists. Citizen scientists are people just like you and me who want to use their observations, their knowledge, their love for wildlife to help scientists learn more about nature. And there's a couple of different apps that you can use if your parents allow you to use it. One is called Seek, S-E-E-K, and another is called iNaturalist. Seek is really cool because you can use a smartphone to look at a flower and it'll tell you what it is. But also, if you take the photograph of that, it will go into a database that scientists can use to learn about the species in your area. So it's a really great way for you to contribute to a scientist. Even as a kid, you can actually make some really great observations. There have been some really awesome new discoveries by kids. Just recently, a young boy discovered a really interesting behavior with ants, and his father is an entomologist or an insect scientist, and his dad had not even seen it. So kids have a different perspective that are really helpful for learning more about the natural world. And then the last thing to do, in addition to not spraying pesticides or insecticides if you can, is just leave bees a little place to nest. So sometimes they need a little patch of the ground, just a little bare soil that they can nest in, maybe some leaves that you don't rake in the spring or in the fall. There's a lot of different things like it that you can do to just leave your yard just a little bit messy in places, and bees really love that. And the last thing I should mention, because everyone always wants to know, is should I be worried about getting stung? Well, we know that honeybees sting, and they're the only bee that stings and dies. They're the only bee that leaves the stinger in your skin. Other bees don't do that. Most bees, are too small to sting us, and male bees of all kinds do not have stingers. It's only the females that can sting. And because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of these bees are solitary, which means they live alone, they don't have a big hive to defend. They don't want to sting you, because if this mother bee were to get squashed trying to sting me, then she has no one to take care for her young, care of her young. So these bees are not out to get us. They're usually small. You're surrounded by small bees during the summer all the time, and they're doing their thing. So with that, I'm going to end my talk, and I just want to say that bees are extraordinary, and I'm really excited to hear your questions today.
Oh, Clay, thank you so much, man. I'm going to pull up our Kahoot link for now. So our classes can join in with that. I want to say to our students, you should find something in your life that you're as passionate as Clay is about bees, and you'll be set. Maybe it's bees, maybe it's something else, but it's really rare. We've done 4,000 broadcasts, and I can say it's very rare we find someone who's quite as passionate and takes such amazing pictures as Clay. So thank you so much for that. We're going to dive in with a little 4-question quiz to test some understanding and have some fun. What you win for winning this is Clay and I's everlasting respect. So no pressure at all. And Clay, if you want to help us out with any of these queries, you can. You covered them all in your broadcast as a little hint for our classes. And then we are going to do a nice big Q&A with our groups for as long as we can, till about the 47-minute mark. Will be Rebels. Will go a little long. And if you have extra questions, you can always email them to us at exploringbytheseatofyourpants, and we'll pass on some more resources too. But Clay, if you're good to go, let's get ready with question number 1 and dive in and do this thing. Our GEM learning crew will come to you second. Mrs. Spinelli's class, we're coming to you first for a question when we do our Q&A, if you're still around. I know you got to leave a little early. Here we go. How many types of bees are there in North America? We did cover this specifically. And bees in the world, is it 4, 40, 400, or 4,000? Clay, any hints for us as we're getting our answers in?
It's a big number.
Anyone who's ever, for the audience that's been here before, if there's ever a large number, it's the one that I will choose for a Kahoot, pretty much universally. So that's your hint of the day. And almost everyone got it. Way to go, everyone. Okay.
Yeah.
4,000 and 20,000 in the world, which is almost, it's 3.5 times as many mammals as there are. So all the bats and mice and antelope and primates like us, there's a lot more bees than there are mammals, which is very cool. All right. All bees will go out of their way to sting people. Is this true or false? We covered this at the end. I know this is a big misconception. Now, Clay, you at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned sweat bees. And I was in Madagascar once and had like 500 sweat bees on each arm. And they were just sucking me dry. And none of them went to sting me. I didn't think they could sting me. So that's your hint to our classes.
Yeah, yes, that's right. Oh. Hey, there you go.
Everyone should have a bunch of sweat bees land in them. It's one of the great experiences you can have in nature. Eager duck is our leader. All bees live in colonies, hives. We covered this. Who is paying attention? Also, when you were highlighting a few of the bee sort of backdrops, that giant bee is incredible. Like, what an amazing creature. I love it.
Oh, wow. To discover that in the wild and to see it after it hadn't been seen in many years was extraordinary.
I hope your Amazon Andy's adventure is equally fruitful, because it looks like so much fun. Oh, look at this mix. Exact dead split. So yes, some bees are solitary. A lot of bees are solitary. A lot of wasps are solitary too. I grew up in Toronto, and all our bees that I saw on a regular basis were in big hives. Same with wasps, but a lot of them live alone. So that's a good thing to cover. All right. Everyone can help by planting pollinator gardens at their home or school. What do we think? We covered ways you can help bees. There's lots of ways. You even covered iNaturalist and Seek, which are like our favorite tools ever at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. So, I don't know why I made this a 40-second question. Sorry, it's taking so long. Oh, we're going to get this soon. Miss Spinelli, stick around. We're going to come to you first for a question. I love your question in the chat. Maybe you've got another because I think your first one was already answered. And then our Gem Learning crew, we're coming to you. We're coming to everybody, I promise. Lots of time for Q&A. All right. Yes, this is true. Go out, plant a garden, plant native flowers. You'll help our bee friends and make a positive difference in the ecosystem around you. Way to go. Legend Meerkat is third. Second is Aquatic Elephant. And first, for all the marbles, drum roll please, everybody, is way to go, Adorable Goat. If you are any of these people, let us know who you are in the chat. And Clay, we're going to head to Belle Isle before they've got to run away. Mrs. Spinelli's class, hello, as you're wrapping up your school day. Hi, guys. Do you have a question for us? Do you want to unmute your mic? You did share in the chat.
Hi.
Hello. Do you have any questions for Clay before you go?
We wanted to know if there were any bees that were special, like native just to Florida.
Ooh. Oh, yeah. There is a special blue orchard bee that's found in Florida because you guys have some very sandy areas, but also a lot of boggy areas. There's one species of bee that only visits bog plants. Truly amazing species of bee diversity. And you have a couple of orchid bees that are in Florida. That's the only state in the country that has some orchid bees.
Really? How about that? Orchid bees are so special. I'm so glad you included them. I'm a biologist by background, so anytime we get to show the really pretty ones that live in them, they're neat flowers too. Great question, guys. Have a wonderful day in Belle Isle. Send me more questions if you've got them. Gem Learning and Rice Learning. If you guys want to unmute your mics, I'll come to you in a second. But we've got our Miss Fisher class with our mic on right at the camera, so come on in Carsonville. Hey, guys. Oh, yeah, your mic's off. It's on, but it doesn't want to work. Sorry. So, hello. And share your question in the chat, and we'll take it in a second. I'm going to head to our Bayside Public School. Sorry, Mrs. Fisher. Hey, Ontario. Welcome in, guys. Share a question. Share a question. Okay, quiet down.
We live in Ontario, and one of my teachers had a successful beehive, and she wanted to know why all of her bees left the hive and didn't come back the next summer or spring.
Well, there is a phenomenon called colony collapse disorder where bees can get sick. There are different reasons for that, but sometimes when bees are exposed to pesticides, there's a type of pesticide called a neonic or a neonicotinoid. It's a big weird word that describes these pesticides, but bees are coming in contact with those pesticides all the time, and it causes problems with their memory. It also causes issues with them not being able to defend themselves against things like mites. So it could be something like that, or it could have just been that maybe they got sick and they realized that there was a better place to go.
Yep. We've got a bug zoo right here near where I live in Newfoundland, and they had a beautiful colony one year, and then the next year they just did not come back, and they've had to find a new colony for that. So it's hard to know with things that we can't actually track and follow around to see what's going on, but that's a really cool question. Thanks, guys. All right, Mrs. Fisher's class, you guys shared a great question that I'm going to take. Can bees swim, Clay? What's the deal?
So that's a really great question. There are no bees that I know of that actively swim, although the bee that lands on water, when it landed on water, it was able, sometimes they would fall into the water and they could swim to the edge. So yeah, they can swim. If they were in the water too long, they probably would drown because insects breathe through the sides of their bodies through something called spiracles. So if they're in the water for too long versus breathing through their mouth, they would drown. But yeah, they can swim a little bit. They can get to the edge.
Yeah. I've never seen a bee in the water, but I'd like to actually, the picture of you of the bee in the water is the only time I've ever seen a picture like that, which again speaks to your incredible skill as a photographer, man. Way to go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our Gem Learning crew, Duxbury, you guys have a weird thing going on with your computer, but fortunately, you're really good in the chat. Rice Learning, we're coming to you next. Their question is it true that all bees die after they sting? You did cover this, but tell us a little more, reiterate about bees stinging and what happens to them.
Yeah, so only honeybees die after they sting. And the reason for that is because honeybees are kind of like what you could call a superorganism. They are another big word is altruistic in terms of they have very divided labor. So to a honeybee, because they have this big larder of honey that they're trying to protect in this honeycomb, they're willing to sacrifice their lives to protect the colony and the queen. But other bees are not like that. They, even if they sting you, they can sting and then sting again if they wanted to, or if they needed to. So honeybees are the only ones that die after stinging.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned superorganisms. They're super cool. We have them in ant societies as well. You can argue termites as well. So there's a lot of really, really cool things in the sort of world of the very small. I'm going to pass along some resources to learn about all sorts of cool stuff when you're done this broadcast. But with 5 minutes to go, we're going to sneak in a few more questions. Rice Learning Academy, come on in, unmute your mic, and take us away. Hey, guys. Hi.
Thank you.
Hello.
And ask your question.
Hi. Can I learn more about the queen bee?
Ooh, yeah.
Sure. So queen bees are really interesting in that they are fed a type of a food called royal jelly, which makes the female big and strong and also helps her to lay lots of eggs. And what's really cool about the queen bee, particularly speaking to honeybees, is that they are very long-lived for insects. So some insects, like a worker honeybee, may only live for a few weeks, whereas queens can live much, much longer than that. So they're really fascinating insects.
Clay, when we're on honeybees, I'm going to highlight something because we didn't actually talk about it in the program, and I'm going to share a longer story on this. But could you explain a little about the waggle dance to us in honeybees? This is one of the cool things in all of nature.
Yeah, so you might say that honeybees have a system of democracy. And what that means is if a honeybee worker is out in, say, for example, the colony is looking for a new food source, like a new patch of flowers or a new place to transfer the nest, what bees do is they will come back. One of those workers that found something really cool in the environment will come back and start doing this waggle dance. And it will basically doing this dance, pointing in the direction of where that food source is. And as more bees join in, they start dancing in the direction of that. And the one that wins, the one that does the best dance, basically convinces the others to move in that direction. And they all dance in the same direction and go off. So bees are so cool.
It's like if you had 10 friends and they all went out to different restaurants, and the one who came back to be like, this is the best restaurant, I swear it is, let's all go together, and they convince their buddies to go. It's such a cool thing. It's one of my favorite things in nature, and it's so amazing to witness. So I'm going to share a little link to that when we're done the program. I'm going to take just 2 more questions. I know time flies and you're having fun, and then Clay will wrap up after that with sort of a final message on bees. But Gem Learning wanted to know, do we have a rarest bee in the world? Is there one that really stands out?
That's a tough question because some bees are just not ever seen, like the Wallace's giant bee. It's pretty rare, but it's probably fairly common in terms of where it lives. It lives in a very small island in the Indian Ocean. Whereas there are some bees, like in the desert Southwest, who are rare only because they may sleep in the ground for like 7 years until the monsoon rains come. So there are many rare bees. I don't know which one would be the rarest, but there are a lot of rare ones.
I like to highlight the classes. The blue whale is the biggest organism ever to exist on planet Earth. It dwarfs dinosaurs, and we do not know how many there are because it's really hard to find blue whales. So you sort of magnify that with any species. It's really hard to get a sense of, especially something like an insect, how many individuals are left. So it's a really cool question. It's a really challenging question. Maybe you'll have to go be biologists and go find out yourselves. That's my hint of the day. Mrs. Fisher's class, if you want to share one in the chat, we'll take an extra one from you. Bayside, come on back in for one more, and we'll wrap up not long after that. Hey guys, grade 3s, unmute. I know. I feel the same way, but do you have a question for Clay?
If a honeybee stings you, how would you get the stinger out?
Ooh.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would probably just carefully either go to a parent and they can help you with tweezers, or you can gently pull it out. But it's probably best to go to a parent and let them help pull it out with some tweezers and put some antiseptic on it.
Yeah, that's a good piece of advice. I haven't been stung by a bee in about 20 years, and I don't even remember what I did back then. So there you go. Kids, it's unlikely. Don't get stung by a bee. It's not likely to happen. I love the query. Mrs. Fisher's class, one more question. We'll bring you up so we can show you as we say it. Hi, guys. What were all the little yellow dots all over the black mason bee? Do you know, Clay?
Is this referring to one of my photographs or just a mason bee in general?
It must be one of the photographs. So
probably dots of pollen, honestly. I mean, also they do have really beautiful patterns that are made by the hair. So it's probably a combination of pollen and the hairs on their body.
Yep. There's a lot of different colors on bees. We'd have to go back and check out the thing, but I encourage you. Like, you can watch this presentation again. It's going to be on our YouTube channel forever. So if you want to share it with your family and friends, head there, do that. Again, our whole World Wildlife Fund series with lots of programs on the go is there. Before we wrap up and say farewell, is there any final message you want to leave us with about bees, Clay?
Just that bees are awesome, that you guys, it doesn't matter if you live in New York City or in the country, there are new bees to discover, there are new behaviors to discover. Take a journal, go out and start observing bees, write some notes, and just keep collecting notes. You never know what you're going to discover. You can find some really cool things. I wish I'd known that as a kid. You don't have to wait to be an adult to be a scientist.
There's no better message than that. We have a lot of people come in from the tropics all the time, and every time we go looking in tropical rainforest, we find new species. So you could literally find a bee that no one's ever found before. You can take a picture of it like Clay. You can even name it after someone or something that you really like, which is one of the coolest things in the whole of science, that you have that power. So Clay, this has been so much fun. I really encourage our classes to learn more. Stay tuned for that great email we'll send at the end. But we do to end up every broadcast, I'm going to bring in all our classes to say a big thank you and farewell. So Gem Learning, Rice Academy, Mrs. Fisher, Bayside, you guys are the loud ones. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Bye for now.